Do we know what we're talking about?
Season 3.
Hi, I'm John Stevens.
This is Matt Russell. And this is Pod Have Mercy. Well, welcome to Pod Have Mercy today. One is the loneliest number. I'm alone. John Stevens is traveling this week, and so, but I think you're in for a treat. Today we have a friend of mine, and probably one of the wisest psychologists that I know, Robert Hilliker Jr. He runs the Ethos Behavioral Health and the Lovett Center, and also the Prairie, which is a addiction recovery center in Texas. And I've known Robert since he's been about 14 years old. He came through Mercy Street as an adolescent in recovery, and he and I have just maintained a connection. Over the last couple of years, we've been doing some groups together with men around the city, and we'll talk about that just a bit, but excited for this conversation.
So let's start. I think if we start with the, kind of, hey, where are we with mental health?
Yeah.
That'd be a great place to begin.
Yeah.
And then
we can work
it
into
actually
that.
segues really nicely into men's issues.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because of some of the cultural stereotypes associated with emotional processing in men. And so how stifled they are, like, that at times women in our culture have more permission. Right. To be expressive or to have feelings, particularly related to sadness. Like, it's okay for women to be sad, but it's only okay for men to be angry. Right. So we don't want women to be in touch with their anger. We don't want men to be in touch with their sadness, because it kind of it bucks certain cultural norms. Right. So I think that may be the segue.
Let's do it. Okay. So when we look at like this post-pandemic world, really interesting. Recently we went to Waco, Texas with the youth, and it was around like 250 folks that were together, and I just realized this is the first time this has happened. In a year and a half. And as I've talked to a lot of the students there, it was interesting to me just what they carried through the pandemic. This real in touch with words like anxiety, or real in touch with words like depression, right? That was an experience that every single one of the kids that I talked to had. And I just realized coming out of the pandemic, as a culture, we're carrying some things, we're freighted with some things, right? That in my experience, don't just go away. The old adage in the program that whatever you bury is buried alive, and that those things that we've walked through as families, as individuals, don't just get better because you get beyond, you have more distance.
Right.
So,
right. Yeah. It's really interesting. And of course I've been hearing a lot of this too, as I sit with people. I'll back up and say, when you said that about Waco and the idea of, being with 250 people, and it just felt like, wow. Yeah. Like, wow, we're doing this.
This is happening.
It felt like we had crossed a really important threshold. And I had that experience this last weekend. I'm probably around the same time you were in Waco, for the celebration of life for a dear friend of mine that passed away pretty unexpectedly. And she was a colleague and a friend. And we had this beautiful, beautiful celebration of life for her that culminated in a second line procession. It was so cool, led by this 10-piece band, and we sang and we danced, and she was a dance and movement therapist, and we sang and danced. It was beautiful. It was like, I went home and told my wife, when I die, I hope it looks like that. That was, and it was John Price and I were like the last guys, because John sang a song and performed some music there. John's a local Jungian analyst and a dear friend to me, and you know him as well. And so we were like the last two people there breaking down sound equipment. I had helped set up the Zoom for people that were out of town. And the long and the short of it is, we're sitting there, and the security guard is talking to another administrator that was for this facility. It was at the garden pavilion there at Herman Park. Beautiful setting, amazing place. They've done such a wonderful job. The city's put a lot into that. And the security guard says, girl, when I die, I hope it looks like that. and the other one was like, yep, I hope so too. And she goes, she must have been really special. And I was like, she was really special. But my experience there, right. was, it was like this, I'm looking around, standing room only, no masks, everybody's vaccinated.
Yeah.
You know, and we're like, wow,
we're doing this.
It felt happening. Like this demarcation.
Yeah.
And so while we're not quote unquote post-pandemic, I think that's, there's still opportunities for surges. There's still ways in which we still have to really push, for continued vaccination and, in the country to, really protect the most vulnerable among us. But there is this other way in which those of us who've been, vaccinated for a while now are starting to return to some of these normal things. And I think, one, there's a tremendous sense of relief and joy and gratitude and appreciation. I certainly felt all of that. A number of people I talked to there really felt that.
Yeah.
But there is this kind of like, we've been through something and we're still trying to process and account for what that was. Yeah. Life is different on the other side of this. We think about, nobody's blowing out birthday cake candles, vaccination or not. Like nobody's like, we're like thinking about things differently. Yeah. There's a way in which it's not hard to imagine that masks are like, we're not just all throwing them away. There's just like,
we're still in that liminal space, right? We're still under that threshold. We don't know what's coming, but we also know what's behind us, right?
Right. Which is a constant experience as human beings of being in that liminality, that liminal space of the in between. And it's something that Bill Curley talks about often. It's something you talk about, and I talk about often. Standing kind of in the hallway of something. Yeah. And I think that creates uncertainty, and uncertainty for a lot of people stimulates even more anxiety.
Yeah.
Right. And so post-pandemic, that idea of post-pandemic mental health, one is huge research on suicidal ideation through the roof. People actually contemplating killing themselves, ending their lives, things like that. Depression, rates of depression and anxiety, all-time high. Yeah. Largely because as human beings, we're social animals. We're hardwired and built for meaningful connection. And when we become increasingly isolated, we tend to get really sick.
Yeah.
If you want to understand the greatest single predictor for health over the course of human experience, like the entire course of your human life, the greatest predictor for health and wellness or illness, it's going to be associated with what are called adverse childhood experiences, death, divorce, loss of some kind, abuse, trauma, neglect, these types of things, trauma, various forms of trauma. But the supportive factor that differentiates, like either cuts your risk factor in half or doubles it, we've talked about this, is relationships. Yeah. So it's having strong social ties or poverty of relationships. That's Bruce Perry's terminology, poverty of relationships, that is going to be kind of make or break for illness. And I'm not talking just mental health conditions, substance use disorders, depression, anxiety, things like that. But I'm talking about health conditions, medical health conditions. Yeah. You are far more likely to have heart disease or diabetes if you have a poverty of strong social relationships. So we're coming out of the other side of this probably culturally, not just culturally, globally. Human beings are probably in a position where we're really vulnerable to illness in various forms, as we're increasingly disconnected through this experience. So I think one of the main and concerted efforts we need to make is to reconnect. Yeah. To reconnect with ourselves, to reconnect with whatever God of your understanding, to reconnect with people. Is such a protective factor for health and wellness.
I think that's really true. That one of the things I have been saying and continue just to kind of marinate in this thought, which is that that connection is the antidote to ... You know, it feels like the connection and deep relationships is the antidote to anxiety, to depression, to alcohol use disorder, to all those things, at least, right?
Yeah.
Those, whatever those things are, that's the antidote. And I think you're right. I think that I think the church is uniquely positioned, if it will, to be a system of belonging that curates, cultivates, and really designs ways of connecting people that are disconnected. You know?
Yeah. You know how all faith communities do.
That's right. We've been so good at it.
Yeah. I think it's like, I think it's the intention of all faith communities to do that.
Sure.
And they have a responsibility and an opportunity to be exactly that. 100%.
And we're best when we're doing that. When we just get like obsessed.
100%.
Obsessed with connection. Right.
Yeah.
That's when the church is always leaning into its God appointed mission. Right. When we get super judgmental about who's in and who's out and what the bar is and who's missed the bar, you know, that's a different game altogether.
Yeah.
Right.
Or when the group becomes overly homogenous, which is something you've really fought against in religious institutions. Really, the entire time I've known you is to basically put together people who normally wouldn't mix and create improbable friendships. That's your, you know,
I call that,
and I think that's,
I call that the redemptive freak show, right? Because
I love it.
Like folks that should never belong together that end up going, wait a minute, right? There's something, then something happens.
You're my brother, you're my sister, and I see myself in you, and I see, when we see ourselves reflected in the other, I mean, Brene said this a really long time ago in a keynote talk that I was at, and you've heard me say it before, but it's always stuck with me. It was almost kind of like a throwaway. She kind of said it in passing, and I was like, I've held on to it because it was it was a great little gem. And she said, it's hard to hate people up close.
Oh, yeah.
It's really hard to hate people up close.
Yeah.
Like hating someone, hating the other, their otherness is only otherness because of its distance and proximity to you. If you pull them in tight, you know, if you make them a part of your life, you will see that you are far more similar than you are different. Yeah,
that's right. That's right.
That's regardless of socioeconomic status, race, you know, anything.
Yeah. So as we kind of look at like mental social health kind of moving out of the pandemic, it seems like one of the factors or one of the characteristics that I've become more interested in over the pandemic is this whole idea of curiosity. Right. Yeah. Curiosity about the other, curiosity about myself. Why did I just react to my wife in this way? Right. Like being super curious about what's happening between us, what's happening globally, what's happening internally. Right. It seems to be a pathway that might open up some areas of discovery, some connections, some ways forward. Could you talk about that maybe a little?
Yeah. It's I mean, you have identified really the cognitive aspect of what I would call the mentalizing stance. And it's really two parts of it, right? So the mentalizing stance is, and the concept of mentalization, you know, strange sounding word, pretty simple. Yeah. It's holding your heart and mind in my heart and mind. When I'm doing that, I'm mentalizing. Right. And so
that's a good thing.
It's a really good thing.
Is that like, it's okay?
Yeah, that's a really good thing.
You psychologists are slippery sometimes.
It's a good thing. I promise.
Okay.
The world would be a better place if we had more of it. Right. So this comes from the research of Peter Fonagy, who heads the Anna Freud Center in London, and one of my mentors, John Allen, who's just a lovely, amazing human being. Anthony Bateman, Ephraim Bleiberg. There's a number of folks who have worked on mentalization-based treatment. But basically, the the simple kind of construct is this: the mentalizing stance. To have a mentalizing stance in our lives means that in relationship to others, we're curious and we're empathic. So if I'm curious about what's in your mind, I'm mentalizing. The second I stop being curious about what's in your mind, I have stopped mentalizing. I am no longer holding your mind in my mind. I'm not attempting to understand. I'm not perspective taking, right? Because I have a sense of a degree of certainty. This is where you and I talk a lot about the way that religious fundamentalism has deteriorated human connection.
Right.
Because it's like, no, we're certain about this, and you need to believe this. And if you don't believe this, then you just don't have enough faith.
Yeah.
So there's no way to disprove a negative. You just and if you're having problems with my half-baked philosophy, then it's
your problem.
Then it's your problem, not mine. Which is like the antithesis of mentalizing. Like it is a non-mentalizing stance, right? To not have curiosity, but instead live with certainty. And so, whereas, we talked about this, you and I talked about this a lot with James Hollis's work, where he says spiritual maturation demands mystery, right?
Spiritual maturation demands mystery. That needs to be a tattoo somewhere on me. That's just.
I don't have any tattoos.
No, I don't either.
If I had one, I should probably put that as a bumper sticker on my forehead. So I have to write it backwards. So I look in the mirror. Yeah, spiritual maturation demands mystery. So the further I'm willing to step into uncertainty and not knowing, the greater likelihood I have to actually be present to experience you.
That's great.
Right.
So really then using the other as that mystery. Is that right? So then seeing the other as that mystery that I'm open to. Right?
Right. Yeah.
That's beautiful. So curiosity and empathy are the two components of that?
Curiosity is the kind of cognitive quality of it. The affective quality, the heart-centered part of it is empathy.
That's beautiful.
Right?
Yeah.
That's obviously the work of that most people are familiar with, the work of Brene Brown on empathy is been such an important and powerful contribution to our field, because she's defined it so simply and in the words of people, right? And through their lived experience. So she says, what is empathy? As opposed to sympathy. Sympathy is I feel for you. Empathy is I feel with you, right? So empathy requires that I touch that place in me and I convey that understanding to you, right?
Okay.
It's a much more vulnerable stance. So sympathy does not require that of me. If you're struggling, I can go, hey, I'm over here, but boy, it looks really bad where you are.
Yeah. Sucks to be you.
The view from up here really, you look terrible.
Yeah, which can sometimes be like the religious expression often to the world is, it sucks to be you, but we're over here. Right? Where empathy seems to be much more rooted in solidarity, moving towards the other, leaving border crossing in a sense, going to
solidarity, inclusivity, right? These, we talk about one of the principal kind of ideas that I think really was brought forth in the life of Jesus is this construct of radical inclusivity, right? And solidarity. So we perspective take, we stay out of judgment, we recognize the emotion in ourselves that's being, that's felt by the other, and then we convey our understanding of that. And all of that requires a certain kind of mindfulness and presence of mind. So when we're doing that, we're empathizing. So we want to be curious and we want to be empathic.
Yes.
And I think faith communities, recovery communities, whatever community you're a part of, if those ideas are central to how connection works, you will have a really adaptive, healthy community. And when you fail to do that, you will watch it fold in on itself. With judgment and anger, divisiveness, and
blame.
And
all the things that I'm really good at. Yeah, that's good. That seems like not just, I mean, and you know, I've talked about this. This seems like the psychological, emotional, social aspect of that is deeply spiritual. So what the way I would frame that as well is that these aren't just good mental health kind of constructs. They really are about a spiritual contour of our life. These are spiritual practices. So mentalization, the way you're talking about it, is something that I can practice.
Yes.
Folks are not just born with or without it. It's something that I can say, oh, I can get better at this.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. No, that's the good thing.
Okay.
That's the good thing is that
There's hope.
it's a learned behavior, right? It's a learned behavior. It is something we cultivate a practice of, and it's something we're no person, myself included, in the course of a single day is constantly in a state of mentalization.
Yeah.
We are fluctuating back and forth and back and forth. And really the only thing that really tethers us back to it is our ability to recognize when we're not on it.
Yeah.
And that's not, and we don't have to reflect, you know, in a morbid way on that, like, oh, we failed, we're not doing this well or something. Instead, quite the opposite. Every time you're kind of knocked off your emotional footing, when you regain it, it's just an opportunity to come back into your practice.
Yeah.
You know,
That's
coming
great.
back to your practice over and over and over again. And that's all. I mean, yeah, I mean, look no further than my own, you know, ask my wife. Like, it's like, you know, I like, this is what I do for a living. Ask me if I mentalize at home all the time, you know, ask my kids what they think about, you know,
your ability to hold them in your, right.
Oh God. Yeah. Sometimes I'm like, go to sleep, you crazy little heathens, you know, like, but other times I'm like, you know, I'm able to kind of hold in mind, wow,
right.
They're really tapped out. They've gone through the ringer in this. They haven't seen their friends in a year. They've been, you know, they've been homeschooled during this whole period, you know. So when I can touch that part in me, right, then I can show up in a really good way for them.
Yeah.
But I don't purport to do that, you know, all the time by any means. But it's a practice for sure.
It's a gift to know that that's something we can grow in, that we can recognize, that we can understand and allow those kind of practices to get deeper. Well, one of the things I wanted to explore with you or talk with you about a bit is, you know, a couple years ago, there was I've had kind of an influx of men that came to me kind of in midlife transition. And you and I talked about that. We started doing some work actually together on this with groups of men. And I've been
some beautiful, amazing groups together. That was that was the most fun I've had probably in the last 2 years.
Oh,
yeah.
And I think in some ways it's the deepest work I've done since I've been a pastor. In some ways, right? Like having a group of men that we will go the distance with for a number of months every week for an hour and a half to talk about some really difficult but also beautiful things, right? And so Jung talks about this kind of midlife transition that is where either we kind of break into a new reality of our own lives, or holding our emotional life, our spiritual life, our social lives in kind of a new skin, or we double down and we constrict and we kind of stay in that competitive, you know, competition or comparison mode, right? Mm-hmm. And the work that you do, and that I've watched you do with in these kind of men's groups, has been.
I would say the work you do also, but go ahead.
The work we've done together in that has been
thank you. Yeah.
helpful in negotiating that space that one normalizes the midlife transition. Because one of the things I've found is that men that step into that feel like they're losing their cheese. Like they don't understand why it's not working anymore, right? Yeah. They don't understand why the success or the failure has profoundly affected them so deeply. You know, and so I wonder if you could just talk about some of the men's work and why that's important.
Yeah, and you know, and thanks for you know, speaking of this and you know, kind of transitioning into this as well, because I think men are going to feel increasingly lost on the other side of the pandemic as well. I think these things are connected.
Okay,
what we've been talking about and what we're shifting to are connected in the sense that that if men didn't have a platform and kind of relational structures to be able to lean in and share, be expressive, and be emotionally vulnerable before this, then a year of separation is not necessarily going to have made that better.
It is not helpful.
Right? So there is, you know, if anything, it may be substantially worse, increased by increased substance use. We've seen huge upticks in alcohol consumption and other illicit drug use. The disconnection kind of begets more of the same. It's just, you go from disconnection to more disconnection, and not really knowing how to find a kind of reasonable, kind of meaningful tether to relationship.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite kind of biblical jokes, right? Is that the one of the funniest things about, or one of the most unbelievable things about the story of Jesus is not that he rose from the dead. It's that he had 12 close friends in his mid-30s.
That's the miracle.
That's the miracle.
And only one of them betrayed him.
Right. And only one of them betrayed him. That's kind of miraculous. Like, it's a really tough thing to do, to kind of age into adulthood and cultivate deep and meaningful and abiding friendships. But that is the work that men right now need to do. They need to, in my perception, and the work that I've seen really work for men is when they say, I'm tired of trying to muscle my way through this and go at it alone. Yeah. I'm not doing it like this anymore.
Right.
I'm turning myself over to this process, and I'm going to allow myself to be emotionally vulnerable, maybe for the first time.
Yeah. And
they start to kind of smash a lot of the cultural myths and ideas that they've had about what it means to be a man. And I think women go through a similar process of change, usually brought about by really clear demarcations into parenthood. I think women have done a much better job of letting parenthood shape them, letting motherhood change them often. And part of that is because you go the distance, emotionally, spiritually, physically, in having a baby, and you kind of cross over to this other realm and come out the other side with a baby, right? And men are watching that. We're witness to that, but it doesn't. I've watched plenty of men go through that process of becoming fathers and not really allow it to change them or change their hearts at all, right? And I think it's much harder for a mother to go through that and not be fundamentally transformed by the experience, at least what I've seen in working with people. So, to your question about, the work, and some of those challenges, the things that once worked, no longer work. It's one of those important kind of demarcations that means we've entered middle adulthood. Is when all the illusions that you had in early adulthood begin to break down or are fundamentally shattered.
Yes.
And that's a tough place. That's a really uncomfortable place, and it's unfortunately been kind of trivialized as, it's called the midlife crisis. And what that means is that you're, 40, 45, 50, and you have an extramarital affair with your secretary, and you buy an unreasonably priced sports car, and you may do those things. It's maybe part of a person's journey to, try and figure themselves out. But often it's not like that. It's not the kind of popular psychology version of that. It's actually more of a quiet death.
Yes.
Where they just feel like, what am I doing? And what does this all mean? And do I even care?
Do I care anymore?
And I feel like I should like my life or myself, but I don't really.
Right.
And
that sense of being locked in and not being able to have any choices. It was interesting talking to a number of men, even this last month, all that are highly successful, that feel a bit trapped by their own jobs, and saying, and are starting to count down, how long do I have to stay at what, and that deep sense of like they're highly successful but very trapped, and are wondering, is this as good as it gets? Is this is my life, I guess, right? And not knowing who to say that to. Right. This is why I feel like the work that you've done, that we've done with men, has been so important to do with other men. Number one, having a group of men that will look at each other and go, "Oh yeah, you're not alone in that," because there can be a deep sense of isolation.
Right. Yeah, and it's a deeply. It's very hard for people to. If you're, let's say let's just give a for example, like, you're a small to mid-sized business owner, you've grown something really successful, you've achieved a great deal. You're in the top 1% of income earners, right? And you're supposed to take that to somebody and go, I don't really, I'm really unhappy. And people are like, oh, really? You're unhappy with the, and there's like this kind of dismissive quality to it. Like get it together, man. You got a good life, be happy. But I think that the part is that just because they've exercised success in a particular area doesn't mean that the other parts of human development have come along at the same rate, right? So spiritually, they're kind of empty. Emotionally, they don't, gosh, we've talked to guys where their ability to identify affect was like they were angry. I'll leave out the other. They're angry, and they're like, yeah, that's pretty much the sum total of what I feel in any day. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, no, there's a whole range of human emotion and experience that you can have, and it's available to you, but you've got to, tap into that. And then there's all the cultural misperceptions about vulnerability and men's ability, and kind of powering through and toughening up and, I could go on and on with those kind of like cultural myths about how men are supposed to be in our culture,
right?
Which is a great recipe for how to be miserable in midlife. But one of the things that we're really tasked with is beginning to, is that when confronted with all this in midlife, we're invited into a process of change, which is invariably going to require letting go of some old ideas, and really questioning what got us here. And more often than not, what people find when they question that is that, as Hollis says, they're little people doing big people things. They are they're living with the same messages, expectations, and beliefs that were infused in early childhood,
right?
And they're going through the kind of adult iteration of that, but they haven't actually come into themselves. They haven't come to appreciate that their calling is larger than that their mission is wider than that.
Yeah. There seems to be the importance of ritual that's involved in that. And so when I think about, like, even as we started this, the two stories, like at Waco, there's this ritual of like worship with these students and these things that we were doing. That's like, the ritual of the end of life celebration of your friend.
Yep.
There's these things that we create as rituals within our culture that says, we're going to help ferry you through this, negotiate these waters, right? And I think that a lot of time in terms of midlife transition with men, we don't have those kinds of rituals that are set up. And so I think that some of the work that we've done, some of the things that I see that James Hollis continues to inspire, even Richard Rohr, those kind, the church should be a place that cultivates these kinds of rituals for men and women to negotiate these transitions that are endemic to all of us, right? And how do we not get stuck in that? How do we normalize that? How do we create then, communities around that help to ferry us through those developmental stages?
Yeah. And at times what has happened with the church and with various churches is that then they get trapped in the symbol. They actually lose the intention behind the ritual. So they go through the motion of the ritual process without any of the spiritual intentionality that's required to really get something from that. So people are like, and that's why people question, they have these crises of faith in midlife too, where they go like, look, I'm coming to the same church I went to my entire life. I kneel, I stand up, I do the thing, I go through the rituals, I take the the communion, I do all
happening?
But they're, what's lost to them is actually the spiritual and emotional intentionality in that, and the process of allowing that to transform them. Because to let a spiritual ritual transform you, you have to give over to it. You really have to, you have to allow for it.
Right.
Yeah. Otherwise the symbol and the ritual becomes a trap unto itself.
Yeah. Or you think
You know?
that it's going to be magic. If I say these words, kind of like
Right.
Harry Potter spells, then it'll release some
Yeah.
kind of emotional
That'd be
bath
cool.
for me, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and again, I mean, the 12-step recovery literature talks about this all the time, the idea of like that people often want the kind of their spiritual awakening, right? Their so-called kind of spiritual experience to be that of a burning bush, but it's more often, as they say, the garden variety spiritual experience.
Right.
It's like it's usually something where we suddenly become attentive to something we've overlooked, and we experience it in a new way, and we begin to allow it to transform us.
Yeah, that's right.
So
Paula D'Arcy says that God often comes to us like within our own skin, like not like disguised as ourself, I think is the phrase that she uses. And I think that that's true, so that within these things, we go back and we realize the things that we haven't noticed become super important. I think that's why the mentalization or the mental mindset, is that the right way of saying that?
Mentalization. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That ability to both kind of carry other people inside of me with empathy, curiosity, empathy and to do that for myself. Right.
Yes.
I mean, I think that's where like in Romans, where Paul says, why do I do the things I don't want to do? I always heard that in growing up as something super judgmental. Right. And it wasn't until my own kind of process of 12-step kind of recovery and just the bottom of my life dropping out that I understood that as curiosity and empathy, right? Of him really saying, why do I do these things? Which is a great question. Let's go figure it out. Why do I do this?
Yeah.
And I think that's the beginning.
And the other word I would throw in there too is self-compassion. That's what I hear you speaking to as well, is that, compassion meaning kind of, deriving from the idea of passion or passio and suffering, and calm meaning with. And so, self-compassion is our ability to suffer with ourselves, our ability to kind of see our suffering as an opportunity for growth and for change, right?
I love it.
Anything worth having is hard fought for, right? And that includes spiritual and emotional transformation. It's not one of those things that just comes lightly. It's I mean, the Bible's chock full of that. Every spiritual tradition really is full of trial and tribulation.
That's right. Yeah.
And so can we begin to imagine, right? Coming back full circle to our kind of idea of not only men's work, but for us on going through a global pandemic, can we see the trial and tribulation as an opportunity for transformational growth? Is there some way in which we can try and take the suffering that we've gone through and all the challenges that we have faced and the losses that we have incurred and try to make sense of that experience to make ourselves and the world around us a better place?
Yeah. And how do we do that together, that connection, that deep sense of community? Yeah. Well, Robert, I can't thank you enough for stepping into this today and just
always
your wisdom.
A pleasure.
Your wisdom and your ability to articulate kind of these unseen places that are so present in us is always just a joy to be around. So thanks for being here today.
I'm always honored. Anytime I get to share space with you, I'm truly honored, and just love you and appreciate what you're doing and what John is doing, and the work of Chapelwood and the podcasts and everything. I think. And Iconoclast, I can go on and on and on about the things that you guys have done, but I really love it, and I'm thankful that I have the connections that we're talking about. Like I share that connection with you.
Yeah,
right. No. We have a shared and profound love for one another, and if everything looked like it was going kind of pear-shaped, like you're on the short list.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, you're on my crunch list. When it's a crunch, I'm calling you. And we've done that for each other, and that's the joy of knowing that, that's the joy of knowing that short list, and I thank God for you.
Thank you. I always enjoy being on and having the time with you. So thanks.
Great. Well, John is not here this week, but he'll be back next week. He was missed this week. I know he would have loved this discussion. But my name is Matt Russell.
And I'm Robert Hilliker.
And this is Pod Have Mercy.